People are saying that the Odyssey movie feels like an atheist tried to adapt the Bible. And that's true because it's missing some key components, some key fragments of its soul. The purpose of this video is to give you those key fragments so that you can enjoy the movie more, whether you already watched it or you're yet to watch it. And of course, if you're going to read the book, then this video is going to make that experience way more enjoyable for you. We begin our story in Ithaca. That's Odysseus' home. That's where he wants to return. That's where his wife is, and that's where his son Telemachus is. And immediately we're given this interesting scene, a scene that's not from the book. I actually think it's really well done. So let's break it down. So what happens is the son, Telemachus, well, he wants to ascend, he wants to take up the throne that his father left him. He believes that his father might be dead. But Penelope says that he's not ready. And what she does is she gives him the bow of Odysseus, a bow which is legendary in that space. So gives her son the bow and asks him to string it. But she knows that he's going to fail because only one man can string that bow. And his name is Odysseus, and he isn't there. So of course Telemachus, he tries to string the bow but completely fails in front of his mother. And it's interesting because she knew that he's going to fail, but she gives a challenge anyway. So what's going on here? Is she just trying to kind of humiliate her own son? That scene reminded me of a book passage that I had read many years ago. And it's from this book called The Book of Puck. And we don't even know who Puck is. It's an anonymous writer. We don't know who was behind this book. But either way, it says this: women seem more like a touchstone who streaks men and see if they are gold or not. How many men have had their lives transformed by not obtaining the love, the women they wanted? Now, of course, this is written in a dating and relationship context. The idea being that the failure to obtain the women they want is what instigates a lot of great men to achieve their greatness in the first place. So he gives the example of Dante, Adams, Washington, many other men. Puck actually gives this quote, which is a misattribution. It says, "It is true that behind every great man there is a woman, but it's always the woman he did not marry." Again, this advice and this point of view is of course given from a relationship standpoint. But think about this. Who is the first woman who tests a man? It's not a romantic partner. It's of course the mother itself. This is actually an ancient mytheme, the idea of the hero's journey being punctuated by various tests given to him by various women in his life, including his mother. So it makes complete sense, and Nolan has done a fantastic job of incorporating that mytheme into the story of Odysseus, even though this situation actually never happens in the book. In the book Odyssey, the relationship between Penelope and her son is almost always peaceful, and if anything, she's not taking the leadership role, Telemachus is taking the leadership role. So the dynamic is different. However, I still think that the idea of she giving him a test and him failing it is actually quite interesting. So that's why I'll give this scene an aesthetics A+. A story of A. Homericness, well, C, because of course this wasn't Homeric. This was not how Homer envisioned this relationship to be. Even so, I thought it was good. Now, he fails this, I said, right? How does he fail this? So when she presents him the challenge of trying to string that bow and he fails it, he reacts emotionally. He reacts emotionally and essentially accuses her of wanting to keep power. That wasn't her intention, though. In other words, her test was not actually a physical test. She gave him the bow, knowing that he would fail physically. However, she wanted to see if he would pass psychologically, but he didn't. He had an emotional outburst where instead he should have remained stoic, calm, silent, and accepted that he was not physically ready yet, or done some other kind of thing. The worst thing that he could have done is have this emotional outburst, right? In other words, when a woman tests you, the correct answer is always stoic resolve. It's not emotional outburst. But of course, Telemachus is young, which is why he didn't pass. And she calls him out on it. She says, "You're just a child." And she walks away. Because he is. He's just a child. However, he succeeds in the challenge later in this video. In the book and also the movie, the goddess Athena plants a thought in his mind that he needs to travel to Sparta to meet Menelaus, one of the great friends of Odysseus, in order to understand what happened to Odysseus, to ask him for information, news, or any kind of even rumors that he's heard about his father's whereabouts. So this is the thing. He has to disobey his mother. So his mother says, "No, don't go to Sparta. The voyage is dangerous and you might die, not only of the just natural causes of death that can happen in a shipboard voyage, but also because the suitors themselves might try to kill him." So he has to voluntarily take risk, and this is important. He has to disobey his mother in order to go on his grand adventure, in order for him to ascend from a boy to a man. In other words, he needs to do this without permission, and this is where Telemachus shines. In the book and the movie, this is the same. he has to disobey his mother in order to go on this adventure. So aesthetics A, story A, Homericness A. This is pretty much straight out of the book. So far, we're actually going off to a good start in this movie. I enjoyed this first opening segment of the movie. Then we have this interesting conversation between Kiss and Penelope. So she's warning him, right? She's warning him about the dangers of this voyage. And the thing she says is there's these people from the sea who are attacking and raiding and, pillaging, essentially. And this is interesting because Homer never mentions people from the sea, never mentions the sea people. The sea people were a mysterious band of raiders and warriors who, again, by their name you can tell that they came from the sea and started attacking the civilizations of that age. And to this day, historians don't really know what happened. So what happened is after the Trojan War happened, right? So the Trojan War happens, Troy is sacked completely, and that sends shockwaves and ripples across the Mediterranean world. But something unexpected happens. Over the next decades, all the major empires of the entire Mediterranean world actually come to a close. They start to flicker. They start to die. And some of them get completely erased. Most of them get completely erased. So we're talking about the Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Assyrians. They don't die completely, but they get shattered. You talk about the Hittites. The Hittites basically vanish. The Mycenaean Greeks, they fall for 300 years before the new golden age of Greece essentially is formed, the classical age is formed. So huge disruption across the globe. Some people say that it's because of the Trojan War. Some historians say that it's because of the Trojan War. But it's not so simple. There was droughts during this period. There's earthquakes. There was floods. There was famine. There was war. And there's all these disruptive things which all happened at the same time. In fact, it got so bad that writing, the very skill of writing, disappeared from the civilized world for almost 300 years and had to be essentially rediscovered. It's a fascinating piece of human history. It's called the Bronze Age collapse, and it's still fraught with mystery up till this day. However, it's weird to see that it's being referenced in the Odyssey movie. It's very, fourth wall breaking, you know what I mean? It doesn't seem authentic to the mythos. Homer, of course, Homer didn't really understand or call it the Bronze Age collapse. He wouldn't have known that it's called the Bronze Age. So terms like Bronze Age or calling them the Sea People, stuff like this just feels too Avengers fourth wall break humor type thing. I didn't enjoy that aspect, but however, it is cool to see the Bronze Age collapse being mentioned because it's a period of history which is completely slept on. Nobody really investigates it because we don't have much data, and we don't have much data because the collapse was so spectacular that writing was lost. In fact, speaking of lost writing, the Iliad and the Odyssey surviving is nothing short of a miracle. There's many parts to the Homeric universe. It's called the epic cycle. So look at this, right? We have the Cypria, lost. Aethiopis, lost. Eleuperis, lost. Little Iliad, Telegony. Only the Iliad and the Odyssey survived, and we're lucky to have even those. All these other books may have been as fascinating as the Iliad and the Odyssey, but they're of course lost to history, and there's nothing we can do about it. The only reason why we even know they existed is because they're referenced in other works later on in antiquity. That's why we even have an idea of what's in there. Otherwise, we wouldn't even know that they existed, but luckily we do. Some of these books tell the stories of the other heroes of the Trojan War. For me especially, there's one specific warrior who completely slept on. So in the Iliad, which I believe to be actually the superior of the two books, if you're going to read only one work of Homer, read the Iliad over the Odyssey. It's fantastic. It's spectacular. It reads so modern and so fast-paced, especially the Caroline Alexander version. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. In the Iliad, there's this character called Diomedes. The way the Iliad works, people think that it's a story of the Trojan horse and the sack of Troy. No, it's not. The Iliad is actually a very narrow 2 to 3 weeks period within the entire 10-year Trojan War saga. Achilles actually sits out. He gets angry at Agamemnon, the king of the Greeks, for a quarrel about a slave girl. It's kind of hilarious, but cool at the same time. And because he's sitting it out, the Greeks take innumerable losses. And in fact, that's the opening stanza of the Iliad. But so when Achilles steps down, somebody has to step up. Diomedes is the warrior who steps up. He starts leading the charge. He starts making the decisions. He starts leading the Greeks not towards victory, but at least to say what they have. But the story of Diomedes' homecoming is completely lost to history, along with these other works. In fact, if you look at the Iliad, it's composed of 24 books. Only in book 24, after the death of Patroclus, that Achilles comes out and starts fighting for the first time in the entire Iliad. In fact, there's this famous passage in the Iliad called the Night Raid. So essentially the Greeks go at night, sneaking behind enemy lines and kill a bunch of people and steal all the horses. Now, who would you think should go on this night raid? Well, you'd think, well, Odysseus should lead the night raid because, well, he's cunning and he's smart, but actually it's not Odysseus who leads the night raids. It's actually Diomedes who does. When Nestor proposes the night raids, Diomedes is the first to raise his hand, and he picks Odysseus to come with him. For all these reasons, I find the character of Diomedes fascinating. And that's why I'm working on the first full-length illustrated novel set in the Bronze Age collapse with Diomedes as a key character, is the protagonist of this novel. I'm calling it Diomedes of the War Cry, the last hero of the Trojan War. He's called Diomedes of the War Cry because in Homer, every character has his own epithet. For example, Achilles is never just called Achilles. He's called swift-footed Achilles. Agamemnon is never called Agamemnon. He's always called far-ruling Agamemnon. Even the gods. Zeus is never called just Zeus. He's called Zeus the cloud-gatherer. Apollo is always called Apollo the far-reaching, or Apollo the far-shooter. Athena is always called gray-eyed goddess. And among the heroes, Ajax is always called Mighty Ajax. Hector is almost always called Shining Hector. Odysseus, unsurprisingly, is often called Cunning Odysseus. But Diomedes? Diomedes is almost always called Diomedes of the War Cry, which is really cool phrasing. I really think it's fascinating, which it means that Diomedes probably had a really powerful war cry, the kind of war cry which instills fear in the enemy. So for this project, I've started to commission artwork. This is non-AI, hand-drawn illustrations, and they're all used in this trailer which I have. If you watched this video so far, you're obviously invested in the Homeric universe. I'll have this trailer pop up at the end of this video, or you can just click on the link below and go and watch this. But anyway, coming back to the movie, well, we kind of flip the camera and go all the way to Troy, and we do a time skip as well. We skip back 20 years to look at what Odysseus has been up to. So this movie has a lot of time skipping and location skipping, but the good thing is Nolan's an experienced director, so none of it feels jarring or stupid. We get what time they're talking about just through the context clues, so it works out pretty well actually. So we actually get to see Agamemnon telling, basically ending the war because he's already won, and everybody gets dismissed, everybody's going home. But in any case, we skip over that scene really quickly and we end up in the land of the Cyclops. This scene and this entire sequence is very important to the development of the Odyssey. It's the iconic scene from the Odyssey. This exact short story you'll find in so many kids' books and things like that. So it's important. So let's see how Nolan handles it. So Odysseus and his men, they go into this cave really not knowing what to expect. They find that there's food and sheep and resources which they can gather and take back home. And so they start to use it. They start to kill the sheep, they start to eat the sheep, and before you know it, the Cyclops enters the scene and shuts off the exit with a big ass boulder, which they know that they can't move. I liked this scene. This Cyclops is reminiscent of this painting, the Spanish painting. You probably have seen this before. Essentially, that they've taken direct inspiration from it. I like the way they did this. The Cyclops feels proper creepy and otherworldly. Now, there's a lot of controversy about this scene because they cut out the nobody joke. So let me explain what the nobody joke is. So it's kind of like a goofy little thing, which I know why Nolan cut it out, and he's actually right to cut it out, by the way. So in the Odyssey, the book, what happens is when the Cyclops asks Odysseus what his name is, Odysseus says, "My name is nobody." And so later on, when Odysseus and his gang pierce the eye of the Cyclops starts to yell and, express its pain. The other Cyclops of the island actually come to the closed door of the Cyclops cave and ask him, "Has anybody hurt you? Has anybody hurt you?" And the Cyclops, his name is Polyphemus, he replies, "Nobody has hurt me. Nobody has hurt me." So the other Cyclops are like, "Well, if nobody has hurt you, then you're probably just freaking out, dude. Chill." And they leave. So I always thought that this sequence was kind of goofy because, for this to work, the phrasing has to be exact. And if the Cyclops literally said, "There's this guy who's in the cave with me who hurt me," and doesn't use the name nobody, then the ploy wouldn't work. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't suit the rest of the movie, or even hell, you could argue that it doesn't suit the rest of the Odyssey, the book even. However, there's a reason for this joke, and there's a reason for this sequence to exist within the Odyssey. The point is to show two things. First, that Polyphemus, the Cyclops, is not an unthinking beast. He is capable of thought, he is capable of reason, he is essentially capable of generosity, but chooses not to be generous. He is capable of being a good host, but chooses not to be a good host. In the movie, they completely mess this up because they make Polyphemus, they first of all don't even give him his name, they just make him seem like a monster, an unthinking brute whose only job is to kill human beings and eat them alive. This is not the Polyphemus from the book. You see, there's many monsters in the Odyssey. Odysseus and his gang confront Scylla, There's no negotiation, there's no conversation. Scylla is a pure monster. Scylla is like an animal. Like if a bear is charging at you, there's nothing that you can say to prevent what's going to happen. It's like the weather. You can't negotiate with the weather. However, the Cyclops is not any of these things. The Cyclops is not the weather. The Cyclops is not an animal. And the Cyclops is not a monster. He's a thinking and rational being who actively rejects the gods. And that's very, very important to the success of the story, because the book, the Odyssey, is about this topic. It's about xenia, which is the Greek word for guest friendship. So the idea is, if you have a traveler visit your home, you're supposed to do all within your power to make sure they're fed, that they have a place to sleep, and they're on their way the next day. Essentially, every time a guest comes into your home, it's an opportunity for friendship. However, in this story, we see some breaks in the law of Zeus, as they call it in the movie. First thing is, the Odysseus and his gang, they enter the cave, and without permission, they start killing the sheep, right? They start having the food without permission. This is a mirror to the suitors in Odysseus' own home. They're taking Odysseus' possessions without consent, without permission. So in other words, you can say that Odysseus actually broke the law of Zeus, broke Xenia, by taking Polyphemus' stuff without permission. But at the same time, Polyphemus also did the same thing. As soon as he entered, he started killing people. But of course, Nolan completely messes the whole thing up by not having any kind of dialogue between these two parties. Without dialogue, there is no Xenia. Xenia only exists between rational beings who can actually think and have a conversation. I mean, hell, think about this, right? What caused the entire Trojan War? Paris, when he was visiting Menelaus as a guest, stole his wife and stole his property. So in the Iliad, it's not that Paris falls in love with Helen and Helen runs off with Paris. It's that not only does he do that, he also takes Menelaus' gold from his treasury. Paris was a bad guest. He was invited by Menelaus to stay at his home, and this is the thanks he gets for his hospitality. And that is why the Trojans are in the wrong. Like, that is why the Trojans are the baddies in the Trojan War. In fact, like, think about this, right? Priam, who's the wise king of the Trojans, should have given Helen back and returned the gold that Paris stole, but he didn't do it. So that's why the gods end up supporting the Greeks. So, Homer versus Nolan. Cyclops has agency, according to Homer. In Nolan's Odyssey, the Cyclops has no agency. He's just a monster, just an animal, completely subject to his own cravings and hunger. So for this reason, I'll give this entire sequence an aesthetics A+. Like, I thought the Cyclops was well done, it was well animated and everything. Like, it looked cool, it sounded scary, and that's how it's supposed to be. Story-wise, C. Homericness, C. It didn't have depth. So this is what, like, people are saying, hell, even the author of, not the author of the Odyssey, the translator of the Odyssey, her name is Emily Wilson, and she wrote the kind of modernized and bastardized version of the Odyssey, which is what was used to make this movie in the first place. Even she didn't like the movie. Like, she dunked on this movie very hard, saying that she would be embarrassed if she wrote any section of this movie. And here's another big divergence from the book that Nolan suffers for. So after they escape from the cave and they're on their way, Odysseus in the book yells back saying, "My name's not nobody. My name is Odysseus. I'm the king of Ithaca, the father of Telemachus and the husband of Penelope, hero of the Trojan War." Essentially, he gloats. He gloats that he was clever enough to outsmart the Cyclops. And because he says his actual name, now the Cyclops goes to his father, Poseidon, and complains by name, "Hey Poseidon, this guy named Odysseus did this to me. I want you to take revenge for me." If Odysseus didn't open his mouth, he would have gotten away with it. He would have probably reached Ithaca in a matter of weeks rather than 10 years. But in the movie, what happens is Odysseus takes out his bow, strings an arrow, and shoots Polyphemus even though he's wounded and dead and no longer a threat. This is different, and it's fundamentally different. In the book, Odysseus' crime was that he was a braggart. He was gloating over a fallen victim. Like, okay, I get that. It shows off the arrogance of Odysseus. That's important. That's a part of his character. In the movie, he's just cruel. The enemy's already down. Why do you want to shoot him again with an arrow, right? There's a difference between being braggadocious and being just straight out cruel. And the movie suffers for making Odysseus cruel rather than just Odysseus, the cunning, wisecracking, fun-loving, gloating hero that he is. I actually think that the 2004 Troy movie actually handled Odysseus way better. He's funny and charming and like goofy instead of like this dark, brooding PTSD soldier. But in the end, the result is the same. They are completely demolished by Poseidon. Poseidon sends them storms and lightning and destruction. and their fleet suffers for it. His men suffer for his arrogance. That was the concept of the book. And this artwork, by the way, is also commissioned for the Diomedes project, which I mentioned earlier. So if you're interested in that, again, check out the trailer. Now we flash forward 20 years to go to Sparta, where we meet Menelaus. Now this scene just jarred me out of the immersion. Like, I actually enjoyed the Cyclops scene. I had plenty to complain about, but I still enjoyed it because it looked visually cool. And the sequence of the Cyclops running after the men as they run through the forest was actually really cool. One of the best outdoors in broad daylight horror scenes which I've ever seen. So I enjoyed that. However, as soon as they go to this, they showed Menelaus as this bald dude. I was completely jarred out of the immersion because Menelaus is called red-haired Menelaus. In the book, he's often called red-haired Menelaus, not bald-headed Menelaus. What are we doing here? This guy does not look like Menelaus is supposed to look. It's just so bad. The casting is so bad. This looks like some random guy you would see in a bar, right? It does not look like the king of Sparta. And the way he speaks, everything is just so American and also, very importantly, not royal. You have to understand that Telemachus is a prince. Menelaus is a king. Agamemnon is a king. Odysseus is a king. Like, these men have a certain bearing, a certain gravitas, which comes with being a king. And they just, like, Hollywood does not understand how to portray this. This is not the right actor for this, and he did not do a good job of presenting this role as Menelaus. And it's just bad. It's just bad. Like, Menelaus from the Troy 2004 movie was actually legit. He seems like an actual king. Not a good man necessarily, but a powerful man. And he's red-haired Menelaus. And of course, the controversy of the casting of Helen, everything that's to be said about it has already been said. I have nothing new to add to that conversation. I don't like what they did. I know that it's politically motivated. So I will instead focus my attention on something different. So they take this actress, right, the Helen of Troy, and they scar her face. So her face is like fully scarred, and it's implied that Menelaus scarred her. Why is this? Essentially in revenge, right? Revenge for running away. But this is interesting because in the actual Odyssey book, the character of Helen is handled completely differently. First thing is she takes blame for what's happened. She says, and this is from the Odyssey, the book, she says, I'm to blame for this Trojan War. I am to blame for these thousands of men dying on my behalf. If all I did was reject Paris and stay at home with my husband, then none of this would happen. Essentially, my sexual indiscipline has caused the death of so many men, and I regret this. She takes blame for her actions. She takes responsibility for her actions. This is noble and just. And the thing is, Menelaus forgives her for all this. He says, you know, it is what it is. The gods were to blame, not you. I forgive you for everything. You're my wife, and I will treat you honorably. So essentially, Menelaus and Helen, low-key, go back to a normal husband and wife relationship, which actually works out for them. In contrast, in the movie, who does Helen blame? Helen blames Agamemnon. Instead of taking any responsibility for her actions, she says, no, Agamemnon is to blame. Like, this entire Trojan War was actually a result of Agamemnon wanting control over the trade routes which go near Troy. That's the actual reason. So it's an economic reason. It has nothing to do with the gods. It has nothing to do with my own sexual indiscipline. This is important because another contrast of Homer versus Nolan. Homer gives Helen agency. He basically says that Helen had the agency to prevent the Trojan War if she just didn't do what she did. In Nolan, Helen has no agency. She is just a pure victim, and it was actually Agamemnon who was the oppressor. So for this reason, for this scene gets a complete C. I would give it a D actually. Story-wise, C. Homericness, definitely a C. But this scene does have some redeeming characters. Menelaus gives a flashback. He gives the story of the sacking of the Trojan War. He talks about how Odysseus had the idea for the Trojan War and all the men hid inside his horse and they snuck inside the city. And basically this is where we see the sack of Troy. We see Agamemnon entered the city and it was cool. I liked the scene. It was fast paced. The music was, energetic and I liked it. It was good. So again, something just jarred me out of the immersion. For example, the walls of Troy. You're telling me that these are the legendary walls of Troy? Ilias? No. What is this? Like, this looks like a Disney World, like, theme park ride setup. You know what I mean? Like, this looks like cardboard. and it's short. Like the walls of Troy are a legendary feature of the ancient world. Like everybody knew that the city of Troy was impregnable because of its walls. But like these walls look like a strong man could just like throw a rope up and start climbing. You know what I mean? Like the movie Troy, look at the walls. They look massive. It doesn't look like you can just throw up a rope and start climbing, right? Like look at this. It looks like it's 20, 30 times the height of a man, whereas here it's more like 5 times the height of a man. This is just looks low budget. It looks like, come on, guys, what is this trash? So aesthetics B plus at best. Then we go to the Lastrygonians. So they go to this island and they're trying to like find food and whatnot. And I didn't like this sequence, so I'll keep it short. What happens is basically, freaking these giants are there. They're in full plate armor, which I don't have a problem with, by the way. Like everybody's crying about the armor that these guys have. Like plate armor wasn't invented at this time, but this is the wrong way to look at it because the Lastrygonians aren't even human. The Lastrygonians don't represent any human culture. They are kind of otherworldly species. So it's not impossible to believe that the Lastrygonians had technology which was advanced compared to human beings. Like that's fine. Like that's not the problem. The problem was that this sequence goes for way too long. Like all that happens in the entire sequence is that Odysseus and his men get on this island, the Lastrygonians beat their ass, break their ships, and then they like the few of them escape. Like that's all that happened. In the book and the movies, this whole sequence actually feels kind of pointless. So the Lastrygonians sequence, like aesthetics A, I guess, story C, Homericness actually A. Like this is pretty much what happens in Homer as well, is the Lastrygonians destroy a bunch of ships, and that's the entire conclusion of the Lastrygonian arc. Now we come to something which is really interesting. We go to Circe. We go to Circe, who's in the modern, island of Corsica and Sardinia. And what happens here? Okay, I'm going to say something which I might regret saying, but I'll say it anyway. So one of the key defining features of Circe is that she is unimaginably beautiful. Like that is one of the core things which Homer keeps saying, is that Circe is a being of astonishing beauty. She's a goddess, she's immortal. But in Nolan, Circe is just a hag in rags. Like she just does not suit the role of Circe. And it's not just a matter of looks, to be clear. It's just like the whole setting. She's just a hag in a shack, dude. Like what is going on? Like Circe is supposed to be a being of power. And more importantly, Circe is not a victim. Like Circe is a goddess. Circe is extremely powerful. She can control animals. She essentially has an army of lions. She has magic which even the gods don't fully understand. Like these are the prior depictions of Circe. Like you see how much power she has. Like look at this. Like look at this artwork. You can clearly see that Circe is a being of just massive power. She's on a throne. Like look at this too. Like she looks like she has so much power. But in the movie, Circe is just some old woman. Again, like what have they done to Circe, man? This is the worst. This is the worst. Like in Homer, Circe has insane power level. Like Odysseus and his men have no chance against Circe. Like she owns that island. Like she does what she wants. In Nolan, Circe is kind of a victim. Like it's just so bad. And this brings us to the issue of translations. So the version of the Odyssey which is used to make this movie is by Emily Wilson, and she basically bungled the whole thing. And she believes that, yes, Circe is actually the victim, right? So that's why Nolan makes Circe the victim. If you intend to read the Odyssey, then you should read either the translation by Richard Lattimore, or in the future, if Caroline Alexander ever does a translation of the Odyssey, then that's probably going to be good, because my favorite version of the Iliad is actually by Caroline Alexander. So to be clear, like I have nothing against a woman translating these classic works. That's fine. They just gotta do a good job. Like Caroline Alexander did a fantastic job with the Iliad. So in terms of aesthetics for the Circe scenes, I give it an A- because while Circe herself was badly portrayed, like the way she makes these men into pigs, that was actually really cool. It looked grotesque, it looked scary, it looked gross, which is what it's supposed to be, so that makes sense. So at this point, Circe actually sends Odysseus and his men to the underworld, which is just in France, I guess. So she sends them up north to the underworld, where he's supposed to meet the shades of Tiresias. Tiresias is a prophet, basically, and he has to tell the rest of the instructions on how Odysseus can go back home. So that's why they're going to the underworld. These scenes were cool. However, we spend all the time on hearing Sinon. Why is Sinon here? So in the book, Sinon is not one of the characters who speak up in the underworld. I don't know why we have so much time spent on Sinon. Nobody cares about Sinon. But luckily, we are rescued by Agamemnon. He comes and tells Odysseus actually something useful, which is be careful when you go back home. Go in disguise. And don't think that the homecoming is going to be, flowers and roses, because of course Agamemnon gets killed when he goes back home. And now I was hoping for the grand reveal, right? I was hoping that, okay, now Achilles will come and speak. They cut out Achilles. This is the most disappointed I've ever been in any movie. Like, okay, let me explain. In the book Odyssey, right, one of the characters who comes and has a conversation with Odysseus is Achilles. You're telling me they cut Achilles in favor of Sinon? That's insane. The point, like, this is such an important part of the book which they decided to leave out. So when Achilles comes back from the dead and talks to Odysseus, he actually says very important things. He says that despite his glory in war, and despite him winning kleos amtheton, which is everlasting glory in Greek, this is what all the warriors want to achieve. Is kleos, is fame. Despite achieving fame, the shade of Achilles is nothing. Achilles literally says this. He says he would rather be a slave alive than be the king of all the dead. In other words, like, this underworld is a place of no power, of suffering. And Achilles is in pain in this place, despite him being glorified in the land of the living. Completely misses the point of this arc in the Odyssey is to show that even the greatest warrior of all time, after death, becomes nothing. But that's missed out. Like, how can you miss out Achilles? Like, it's insane. And then the mother of Odysseus. Now, I understand that they could have cut this part. So what happens is the mother of Odysseus is actually there. She's already dead. So, she dies of heartbreak. And this is a very emotional and powerful scene in the book, because Odysseus realizes that even if he goes back home like tomorrow, he's already caused so much suffering. His mother is literally dead as a result of him not being able to return home, and feels a lot of guilt for this. So aesthetics A, story D, Homericness D. Come on, dude. And then, now I want to explore this idea that Agamemnon did nothing wrong, because that might be the title of this video, and you might have clicked for that reason. So what are the crimes of Agamemnon? So the first crime of Agamemnon is that he sacrificed his daughter in order to get favorable winds, right? That's what they keep saying. So this is interesting because that idea actually never shows up in Homer. So let me actually explain what happens. What happens is the entire Greek army has amassed at Aulis. It's like a port. And they need to travel across the Mediterranean to get to Troy to besiege the city. And the winds completely die out. And of course, they need the winds to travel, right? These are sail ships. And without the winds, everybody is getting agitated. Some of them are trying to leave. So the entire war was almost lost at this time if he didn't sacrifice his daughter. So the seer, right? Calchas is the seer. He's like the prophet. And Calchas says, hey, Agamemnon, if you don't sacrifice your daughter, well, this war is already lost before it began. So that's the reason why he even thinks about sacrificing his daughter. It's not that out of cruelness, right? He's not cruel. Agamemnon loves his daughter. He is forced by duty to sacrifice his daughter. Now, you might not like that, right? You might not like that justification. That's fine. Now, there's many versions of this. In Homer, this actually doesn't even happen. So how do we know that? The king, Agamemnon, actually offers the daughter, Iphigenia, as a bride to Achilles. So in other words, he didn't sacrifice his daughter, and that entire thing didn't even happen. So in Homer, this episode at Aulis actually doesn't even happen. So Agamemnon did nothing wrong in Homer. In Nolan, Iphigenia was killed, and it was because Agamemnon was cruel and cold. In Aeschylus, Iphigenia was in fact killed, but out of duty rather than cruelty. In Euripides, Iphigenia is not killed. Iphigenia is spirited away by the gods, and her body is substituted for a deer. So that's what I mean when I say Agamemnon did nothing wrong. It really depends on who you're reading. The second big crime of Agamemnon, and this is actually a central part of the Iliad, is the first, like the opening stanza of the Iliad says, "Rage, goddess, sing of the rage of Peleus' son Achilles, murderous doomed, that cost the Achaeans countless losses, hurling down to the house of death so many sturdy souls." Fantastic opening, if you ask me. But the rage here is not directed at the Trojans. The rage that they're talking about here is actually the rage that Achilles has for Agamemnon, because Agamemnon stole his slave girl. But let's see it from Agamemnon's perspective, right? Let's see it from Agamemnon's perspective. So Agamemnon and the other Greek kings, all of them take loot. They take gold and silver, but they also take women and male slaves as well. So this is something which all of them do, including Achilles, including Agamemnon, including Odysseus, like all of them. So what happens is, one of the slaves that Agamemnon takes happens to be a priestess of Apollo. And her father, being the head priest of Apollo, complains to Apollo saying, hey, Agamemnon has stolen my daughter. I would like you to take revenge. So Apollo sends a plague to the camp of the Greeks, which causes, of course, a lot of death. And this is the reason why Calchas, the seer, again, the same guy who caused Agamemnon to kill his own daughter, says, Agamemnon, you fucked up again. You need to return this girl to her father, and that's the only way you can prevent this plague from spreading. So Agamemnon is pissed because why is it always him who has to lose property, right? And this big public argument happens. Basically, in public, Achilles calls out Agamemnon being a bad ruler, a bad general, for leading the Greeks into ruin, and gives Calchas unconditional protection. So you've heard this phrase, praise in public, criticize in private. Well, Achilles doesn't do that. He just criticizes his king in public and humiliates the king in public. So what do you think happens when you humiliate the king in public? He has no choice but to enact vengeance. No choice but to enact revenge. Otherwise, he's going to look weak. So Achilles has essentially put Agamemnon in a position where he has to retaliate. So, to be clear, I'm not 100% in favor of Agamemnon. I think essentially the story of the Iliad is that disagreements and confusion and miscommunication between men, and hell, even women, is what causes all this pain. That's the point. All I'm trying to say here is that Agamemnon was actually kind of justified in doing what he did. And after this, the boys are getting their ship and they start to go towards their home, and they have 3 challenges which they need to solve. The first is the sirens. And the sirens, dude, Nolan completely messed up the sirens. They don't even show the sirens. The whole scene is 15 seconds long. They just show a bunch of vague noises coming out of the clouds. They don't show any sirens. All they do is they show freaking Matt Damon crying on his mast. They could have done such a cool job with it, right? They could have shown the sirens, and sirens have been portrayed in cinema before. It's not the first time. So I think it's a complete fail. They didn't have the guts to show the sirens. They didn't have the guts to show, the sirens at play. Why? Because the sirens are female. In this movie, no female can ever have agency. No female can ever be bad. And that's the problem with the movie. They don't give women agency. It's stupid. So that's why they don't show the sirens. So in terms of aesthetics, C. They could have made the sirens scene so cool. They didn't. Story B, Homericness B. Fail scene. Then we go to Scylla and Charybdis. So the blind prophet Tiresias basically gives Odysseus 2 options. Option number 1 is Charybdis. If you go with Charybdis, you will either have complete failure or complete success. If you survive Charybdis, awesome. Everybody lives and everybody can go home. However, if you fail Charybdis, everybody dies, nobody can go home. On the other side, you have Scylla. With Scylla, it is a downside. It's a controlled downside. So you lose 12 men, but everybody else survives. So this is a question, right? Should you risk everybody, or should you knowingly give up a few? So Odysseus makes the decision to sacrifice a few to save the whole. And I wish that they had done this scene better, but it wasn't bad. The freaking Scylla was bad though. It looked like CG. It didn't look good. It didn't look scary at all. Look at this painting, right? I just saw some random painting from the internet. This trail of Scylla looks way more scary than what they did in the movie. And Charybdis as well. They could have given Charybdis teeth. They could have given Charybdis kind of an ethereal feel, but they didn't do any of that. It was boring. It was a mid scene. And by the way, this is an artwork that I did 10 years ago. I thought I would show it because I've been invested in the Homeric world for a decade at this point, reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, of course, but also all the other research which are part of this world. So aesthetics for the scene, B, stories. I'm so tired, dude. This movie could have been so good, but they just messed it up. I've been wanting to see the Odyssey movie for a decade, right? I showed you. I drew this a decade ago. I've been invested in this world for so long, and I wanted to see the Odyssey brought to the big screen, and it's just not there for me. I'm disappointed. And then we have Odysseus getting stranded on this island. Well, actually, that's not true. He chooses to go to this island despite being warned. So this is the island of Helios. Helios is the sun god, and he has his cattle in that island. And this is an interesting part of the story because I didn't understand it when I was younger, but I understand it now. So what happens is he survived Charybdis. He survived Circe, he survived all these things, and he has his crew with him. But now the entire crew dies as a result of his actions. So what was the point? What was the point of going through all of this, and his crew just dies anyway, every single man, he's the only survivor. I thought that this was almost bad storytelling, what is going on? but it's actually meant to teach a lesson. Odysseus had the option of not setting foot on the island, but he does so. He allows it. Basically, what happens is he knows that if they eat the cattle of Helios, then everybody dies. And he tells that to his crew, says like, hey, if you eat even a single piece of meat from these cattle, then everybody dies. So the crew says, no worries, like we'll set foot on the island, we'll take rest, we'll eat our own provisions, but we won't touch the cattle. And they get on the island, and now the temptation is there. So here's the lesson which I want to present. Imagine if you're addicted to zins, but you keep going to the grocery store, you keep going to the gas station where you usually get the zins. At some point, you're going to cave. At some point, you're not going to be able to resist the temptation, and you're going to fall to your older addiction. Imagine if you want to stay in a committed relationship, but after work, you always meet up with this attractive coworker. Like you've already lost. It's only a matter of time until you cave. I'll give you another example. Imagine if you're trying to stop using your phone, starting to stop using pornography or something like this. Well, if you keep having the Instagram app on your phone, you're essentially having a Trojan horse in your phone, which at some point you'll cave to. That's the problem. That's what the story is trying to teach us. If the goal was to avoid eating the cattle of Helios, then they shouldn't have even set foot on it. The second they set foot on it, they'd already sealed their doom. And that's what the story is. Like the story is basically teaching us, if there's something that you want to avoid, you have to avoid it completely. Not just you can't take a little bit and hope that it'll work out for you, because it won't. So aesthetics wise, actually they preserve what the scene looked like in the book. The story is an A, and it is actually true to Homer. So I'm happy to say that this scene was actually taken from the book exactly as it should have been, and it was done well. And now they go to Calypso. Now this is an important scene, and they mess it up in an interesting way, in a political way. So let me explain. So Calypso is this essentially minor goddess who traps Odysseus for 7 years. This is important. So Odysseus, after the end of the Trojan War, voyages for 10 years before he gets back home, right? All the events that he goes through, all these challenges, right? They take only 3 years. So he could have gone back home now, but no. Calypso holds him prisoner for 7 years, more than twice of all the other challenges combined. So in other words, the biggest hurdle on his way back was not the Cyclops, was not Circe, was not the Laestrygonians, was not the underworld, was not the Sirens, was not Charybdis, was not Scylla. It was frickin' Calypso. Calypso was the biggest delay on his road back home. Calypso is the reason why like all this happened, right? Like this big delay happened because of Calypso. Like she's the big bad. However, in the movie, she's good. Like here's the important thing, right? In Homer, the relationship between Calypso and Odysseus is non-consensual. It literally says that Odysseus is unwilling and Calypso is only too willing. So for 7 years, is manipulated, he's imprisoned, and is subjected to non-consensual sex. And like in Homer, Calypso is essentially in the wrong for doing that. The gods literally have to come down and intervene to let Odysseus go. But in Nolan, it's completely fine. She's cool. So this is a double standard, right? When you see a massive power imbalance plus sex, what does that usually mean? Like imagine if the roles were reversed. Imagine if a man kept a woman imprisoned for 7 years and, did these things. Like obviously that would be wrong, right? But if a woman does it, it's completely acceptable. So I don't like what Nolan has done here. Now this ties back to Xenia. Xenia again, like is guest friendship, right? So Odysseus was as a guest to Calypso. One of the key components of the guest friendship is you feed them, you give them a place to rest, and then you send them on their way. You cannot hold your guest captive, but Calypso does. In other words, she breaks Xenia. But in any case, eventually Odysseus does escape. He gets on this small raft and eventually finds his way back home to Ithaca. And now finally we are at Ithaca and everybody's home, right? Odysseus is there, Telemachus is there, he's returned back from Sparta basically, and Penelope is there. Everybody's here, the suitors are there, and we have this final face-off. But before we have the final face-off, we have this goofy-ass scene where Penelope goes off, like she just has this outrage at Telemachus because this is the dumbest thing, right? Telemachus now knows that Odysseus is on the island, and he knows that Odysseus is going to enact vengeance. So he's thinking of, his kingship. He's thinking of becoming king next. But Penelope freaks out at this. She basically says something like, you are going to become the next ruler of Ithaca, not me. And it's all because you're a man and I'm a woman, and all my years of experience count for nothing, and the throne is going to pass to you just because you're a guy. And like it's the stupidest thing. Like she freaks out for no reason. Like here's the thing, right? There's a commonality between all the rulers in the entire Greek world. Achilles, the king of the Myrmidons. Odysseus, king of Ithaca. Diomedes, king of Argos. Ajax, I forgot what he's the king of. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae. Menelaus, king of Sparta. Hector, prince of Troy. Aeneas, prince of Troy. Memnon, I forgot his kingdom's name. Penthesilea and Hippolyta. Amazons. Like all of the heroes of the Trojan War, all of them have one thing in common, which Penelope does not have, is that all can fight. That is the one thing which Penelope lacks. She thinks that it's about experience. It's not about freaking experience. Experience counts for nothing. Like you need to be able to fight if you want to be able to rule. And that's why Odysseus needs to come back. Like think about this, right? For 10 years, Penelope has ruled in Ithaca. And what has she actually succeeded in doing? Like the island is in shambles, right? There's a bunch of guys in her own home and she's powerless to kick them out. This is actually a really important thing. Like for all her wisdom and her smartness, she was not successful. Like she was not successful in getting the suitors out of her home. Like we can say that she did her best, that's fine, but she was not successful. It took Odysseus and his bow and arrows. It took violence to get the suitors out of his home. It required violent intervention. And that was something which Penelope was not able to provide. So she has no right to be asking for the throne. She has just no right to do that at all. And now we come to Odysseus infiltrating his own home to see what the suitors are like so that he can take vengeance, right? And this scene is actually cool. Like he really looks like death has entered the house and the suitors just don't know what they're looking at. They don't realize that they're abusing Odysseus himself. And now we have this kind of an interesting scene where Penelope and Odysseus have a conversation without her realizing that it's Odysseus that she's speaking to. Here I want to reveal a kind of a propaganda. It's what it is. The Greeks are in dark colors. The Trojans are in light colors. Even in the 2004 movie, the Greeks are in dark colors. The Trojans are in light colors. They're essentially the good guys, right? The Greeks are seen as greedy. The Greeks started the war because Agamemnon wanted the trade routes. The Trojans are good. They're just defending, right? Hector is brave and honorable. He's just saving his people. The Greeks are deceitful and cruel. Achilles could have just killed Hector and been on his way, but no, he drags Hector's body. Odysseus did not win the war in any honorable means. He devised this trick in order to win the war. Where Trojans, they're kind and wise, right? King Priam is kind to Helen and he's wise. The Greeks are controlling. Menelaus is a bad husband because he's controlling, right? And on the other side, Paris, he's not controlling. He is just in love. And then the Greeks are aggressive, right? They want war. But the Trojans are defensive, right? They're just making the best with what they can. So this idea that the Trojans are the good guys and the Greeks are the bad guys is of course not a part of Homer, but it is in fact a part of the Aeneid, an epic poem created by Virgil hundreds of years after Homer. So this idea of the Trojans being the good guys is actually not new. It's pretty old. It goes old as the Roman Empire. Essentially, Virgil was saying that the Roman Empire actually draws its roots from Troy. Virgil actually says that Romulus and Remus, the founding fathers of Rome, are actually descendant of Aeneas, who is of course a Trojan. So the Aeneid is actually an anti-Greek, pro-Trojan and pro-Roman propaganda, which still today, that's what we use as our template, right? The 2004 movie as well as this movie is essentially anti-Greek and pro-Trojan. Homer produced art. Homer does not actually support either side. He is a master of the tragedy itself. So Homer does not cause this cheap conflict between good and bad. He does not cause this cheap conflict between oppressor and oppressed. He instead has a beautiful cast of characters who are all acting from their own duty. And you really feel like you can't take sides. In some chapters of the Iliad, you feel like rooting for the Greeks. In some chapters of the Iliad, you feel like rooting for the Trojans. And the end, you just feel like both sides could have been brothers, could have been friends, if it only were for not freaking Paris. Like Paris is the bad guy in the Iliad, right? I can't stress this enough. You gotta read the Iliad. Some of the most fascinating scenes in literature are from the Iliad. And that's what these modern movies kind of miss out on. And now we come to this infamous line from this movie. The age of bronze is collapsing. My brother, how are the people in the Bronze Age saying that the age of bronze is collapsing? They didn't know that it was called the Bronze Age. Like we modern people, gave these names, gave these ages names. We called it the Stone Age. We called it the Bronze Age. We called it the Iron Age. How are people in the Bronze Age calling it the Bronze Age? It doesn't even make sense. Imagine we had a movie set in World War I, and the soldier says, I'm glad World War I is ending. Like, dude, you don't know it's called World War I because World War II hasn't happened yet. In the same way that the people in the Bronze Age didn't know that they were in the Bronze Age because the Iron Age hadn't happened yet. You know what I mean? Like, it's dumb. It's dumb. It's so stupid. And then the handling of the gods, so dishonorable. Aside from the casting, right? The casting is atrocious, but I'm not even talking about that. The idea that the gods are just these PTSD hallucinations is so pedantic. Like, basically, Athena doesn't do anything. She just shows up and makes a grimace face and vanishes. Like, she has no power. But in the Iliad and the Odyssey, Athena is a goddess of such marvelous power. She's one of the strongest goddesses there are, period. She fights Ares in war. This movie dishonors the Greek gods, in my view. It's just terrible. So in terms of aesthetics, I thought it was an A+, simply because the visuals of the burning city and the drama and the music and the horse and all that stuff, like that was cool. I like that. In terms of the story as well, it works. In terms of Homericness, it's a D. And now let's go to the end game, right? So this is when Penelope takes the bow of Odysseus and challenges the suitors to string the bow. And we had foreshadowing of this because, of course, she tells Telemachus to string the bow and he fails. This brings up an interesting question. Why are the suitors even there? Who are the suitors in the first place? This is something which the movie actually doesn't explain, but hell, even the book doesn't explain. So the suitors are just men from the island of Ithaca and the neighboring islands. They're not actually invaders. This is interesting because what they're saying is the kingdom doesn't have to be destroyed by outside forces. The kingdom has forces even within it who can destroy it. And I think actually Robert Pattinson does a fantastic job of playing the suitors. He seems arrogant and kind of slimy and evil, and it works well. So this actually ties in with the idea of hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. Because the strong men, so Odysseus and his generation of men who went to Troy to fight, well, they were the strong men. They created a lot of prosperity in their island, and everything was good. But they left, and in their leaving, they left a vacuum which was filled by the weak men. The weak men plundered, they did not produce, and they created the hard times. But now, of course, the strong men are coming back, and the weak men will be replaced. Unnecessary wars is what ruined Greece. Like this is a very important message, actually. Think about this, right? What happens in war? Who's the first person to volunteer for going to battle? The most patriotic, the bravest, and the most capable men are the first to put their hand up and go to war. And those are the first men that we lose. So every time a war breaks out, it's the best men that we lose first, and the weak men who stay behind and ruin their own nations. So the Odyssey actually does a fantastic job of showing something which is so true. Like in World War II, what happened? All the best men from Germany, the best men from the UK, best men from the US, and all the participant countries, they all put their hand up first and went and got slaughtered, got mowed down by machine gun fire. They didn't even have a chance to be heroic. They just got slaughtered like animals at a butcher shop. That's what I fear is going to happen to the world in the upcoming future. But in any case, Odysseus is back and is bringing back vengeance. I thought this part was cool. But here too, the movie kind of messes one thing up. In the book, The Odyssey, Telemachus is right there with his father. Like as his father is shooting arrows at the suitors, Telemachus is right there with spear in hand, skewering the enemy. This is very different from the movie, because in the movie, Telemachus is kind of made to seem like a wimp. Like in the entire battle, right? Odysseus kills like 20 to 30 men on his own. And Telemachus struggles during that entire time to kill one guy. But in the book, it's different. Telemachus is actually quite competent. He's a good fighter. So he's right there. Now, to be clear, he's not as strong as his father, but he's still there. He's providing very valuable support. So they make Telemachus kind of wimpy and weak. I wish they didn't do that. But hey, the movie has other bigger flaws, right? So all this to say, the Odyssey is one interpretation. The cool thing about the Homeric universe is that it is so powerful that every generation will interpret his works in new and different ways. This is what we've gotten in 2026, the Odyssey movie. But it's not the first Odyssey movie. There are plenty of Odyssey adaptations before this, and there will be more adaptations of the Odyssey in the future as well. If you want to immerse yourself in the Homeric universe. Don't use this movie as kind of like the benchmark. It's not the benchmark. It's kind of mid, actually. Instead, read Troy by Stephen Fry. It's a fantastic book. And I would suggest reading this before you read the Iliad, because the Iliad isn't written for you. The Iliad is written for an audience that was like 2,000 years ago, right? They understood things in a different way than you. So for you to enjoy the Iliad, you need some background knowledge. You've gotten a lot of background knowledge from this video, but not all that you need. Troy by Stephen Fry is a fantastic, lovely book. It shows love. Like, this is important. Stephen Fry loves the Homeric universe. He honors it in his writing. You can see the proof of his love for this universe in his work. Christopher Nolan does not love the Homeric universe. He does not love the Odyssey. And that's why he made a movie which does not show love. Hell, even Emily Wilson does not love the Odyssey, despite being the translator. And when you want to read the Iliad, which book should you read? Which translation should you read? Read the Caroline Alexander translation. I really, really like this translation. And when it comes to the Odyssey, read the Richard Lattimore translation or the Fagles translation. You can just Google it, you'll be able to find it. That is how you can honor Homer. So my prediction is that Nolan's Odyssey won't have the same cultural impact as Troy, the 2004 movie, and definitely not the impact of 300. Why is this? It's because Troy and 300 looked cool. They inspired a small niche audience to love the movie. The Nolan Odyssey is mass market. I think everybody can like the movie, but no small core of people will love the movie. And if you want to have long-term cultural impact, you need a niche which loves your stuff. And I don't think this movie was good enough to create that kind of niche. So I think in like a year or two, like nobody will even be talking about this movie. However, like the movie 300 is still trending. Like as of last week when I checked it, the movie 300 is top in streaming. Like, think about this, right? 300 was a smaller budget, and of course it's been like 13 years since its release. It's still streaming in the top 10, top 5 actually. That kind of impact, I don't think Nolan's Odyssey is going to have. Now, coming back to the influence of Homer, check this out. In 400 BC, the Oresteia was written by Aeschylus, set in the Homeric universe. The of Virgil in 19 BC, set in the world of Homer. In 1314, Dante uses characters from Homer. In much more recent times, in 1922, Ulysses by James Joyce is basically a carbon copy of the Odyssey, except set in the modern world. Well, modern to them, not us, obviously. 2004, the Troy movie. 2017, Mario Odyssey. 2018, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. 2020, Troy, A Total War Saga. And 2026, the Odyssey movie that we talked about in this video. Like, what I'm trying to show here is that Homer's universe, Homer's works will never die because they're just too good to die. And people will continuously innovate and reinterpret these every single generation. It will never stop. That is the power that Homer has. That is the power of great art. And that is why it's inspired me to do this, like inspired me to make something in Homer's universe as well. That's why I want to publish Diomedes of the War Cry. So if you enjoyed this video and my take on the Homeric universe, then you're going to enjoy this book. So check it out. If it's right for you, then I would be very grateful for your support. I'll have the tile pop up for the trailer which I've made. If you've enjoyed this video, you're for sure going to like that trailer.